I'm really delighted now to introduce another panel for your delight and delectation this afternoon. We have a panel on general best practices in open data, which is being chaired by the much admired Silona Bonewald. She's the Executive Director of IEEE SA Open. Silona.
Thank you. Thank you, and I'm sharing my panel with two wonderful ladies who know much on the open data realm.
Lisa.
Lisa.
It's all right, don't worry.
Sorry, Lisa Allen from ODI, and Sarah Womer from Plessas? Plessas Experts. So first, who am I? She gave a general direction. We'll go fast on it. I'm mostly doing this so that later you can find me. My open data journey started way back when. I've been doing databases since the 80s. And I started doing open data in 2004 in government when everybody thought I was a crazy person. So it's been fun to watch it all get expanded since then. Lisa Allen?
Hi everybody, I'm Lisa Allen. I'm the Director of Data and Services at the Open Data Institute. So at the ODI, I manage a team that looks after consultants to helping people with open data, to our data team, to being a sponsor for our data assurance programme. I think my journey into open data was from my time at government. So I led the release for the Environment Agency of releasing 2,000 data sets as open within 1 year, when in the past we'd only released 93. And that was part of the big DEFRA challenge, so Department for the Environment, where we released around about 10,000 data sets as open in that time. And there's others in this room who was also involved in that challenge. And then I went on to do GDPR, which was the opposite.
Oops. Okay.
Hi, my name is Sarah Womer. I actually started off in the 90s as a journalist, and then later I ended up as an analyst for a defense company, and that's September the 11th, 2001 hit. And then I ended up looking at the weaponization of information and the weaponization of data. So I was there very early on looking at how information could be weaponized or used in a negative way. And then I just got into OSINT, and I've been doing OSINT, which is open source intelligence, for about 20, yeah. So.
Awesome. And so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go like 5 minutes each into some of our pet topics to give a quick overview, and then we'll open up for questions. Okay, so with Lisa.
Yep.
All right.
Oh no, I don't need to. I was just going to keep the original one. That's for after reading.
Oh, that's for after. Okay.
Yeah, it's just for people with after reading. Cool. Yeah, so I was just going to touch on things like the outcomes for open data, some of the risks you need to think about, and how it can help you with trust and transparency. So I always like to start with the outcomes, and my team will always hear me say, you know, it's not about the process, it's about the outcome. And when you think about some of the stuff that happened with the release of the Environment Agency's 2,000 data sets as open within that 1 year, it was quite amazing, actually, because a lot of the time people were quite negative about releasing the data, because obviously they were told ministerially you needed to do that in that time. But I don't think it's always obvious to people about how the data can be used by other people. So some of the stuff that was really interesting from that time was how the data was picked up and used. So one of the data sets that we released was the LiDAR data, so that's terrain data. And for the Environment Agency at the time, it was just using it to plan where they were putting flood defences. And so it was very much engineering, operational, about saving people's lives, really. And it was amazing to watch some of the outcomes that happened on the back of that. So it was picked up by an archaeologist who found 17 kilometres of Roman roads. And I remember the guy was just so ecstatic because he was just about to retire, and he just found all these Roman roads he'd been looking his entire career for, and it'd been in that data all along. But that was not something that was in our mind when we were thinking about open data. It was also that it got then picked up in Minecraft, so the kids' game. So that was pretty phenomenal as well, and we couldn't have predicted that either. One of my favourites was 3D art of London. So it just showed you actually how culturally data can input as well. And obviously at the ODI we have an arts programme as well. But it's other things that we're doing today at the Open Data Institute, where we're looking at open active. So we're looking at trying to get more people active to enhance well-being and health through people publishing open data, so you can find activities as easy as you can book a hotel. And that just shows that actually there's so many really positive outcomes that come from open data that you just can't really think about it sometimes when you're in an organisation. You don't see all those possibilities that are out there. And actually, once you start releasing that data, then you start seeing all that come back to you. And it's not just economic value, you know, it's much wider than that, social, societal and cultural. But then that leads me into my other topic is about risk. And this is one of the things really, it was in the notes, if they'll get access to the PowerPoint, is a bit about a publishing process really, about how you actually go about publishing the data. Because it was one of the things we had to look at quite clearly, and we work with organisations now to help them publish their data. But there's the 101 of, you know, identify your data. I mean, it's a no-brainer really, but there's lots of organisations that don't even have data catalogues and don't even know what they've got. But then it's about assessing that risk for sharing that data. And what you find is, because it's almost like, and I don't know if I can say this, but GDPR has done too good a job, so people are scared. But they're not scared for the right reasons. So if you look at some of the risks within data, yes, personal data is a risk that you need to mitigate or not share the data. I mean, we don't think that all data can be open. Data exists on a spectrum from, you know, closed through to shared through to open. And then it's a necessary mitigation which you'll need to put in place. And some data might just mean you share it with a limited number of people, you know, in a data institution or for research purposes. But other data you can mitigate and you can share it out there openly. And I think looking like through a data sharing risk assessment, we're just about to release a tool in the next few weeks to help people really work out what it is. Is it a real risk or is it a fear? So lots of people have fear that it's the data quality is not good enough, or they'll be fearing that other people won't understand it. And one of my personal favourites when I was working at the Environment Agency, somebody said, I can't release it because I'd have to translate it into Welsh. So you're like, yeah, I don't think that's the case. So understanding what actually is a fear compared to actually technically the things that they need to consider, like IP, commercial, national security is a big one too, and we've touched on some of that earlier. So actually understanding what are the ones that are really risks compared to the ones that are fears is quite important. And then I think that leads us into thinking about trust and how open data can help you with trust and transparency. So what does it mean to be a trusted organisation? And one of the things that we're doing at the ODI is looking at data assurance. So what does it mean to have trustworthy practices with your data, and how can you demonstrate that for others? Because often if you share that open data and you've not put what the data is about, what the purpose was for, it's really hard to pick it up and use it. So actually we're looking at a code of conduct that's pointing out those things that's really important for trust. So there's an easy way to demonstrate, and you can pick up and know that an organisation has followed those practices. And we're also looking at how you apply that to a data set too. So how do you know that they've got a specification? How do you know, it's not got other people's third-party rights embedded in it? Just to make it as easy as possible and frictionless as possible for that innovation, that efficiency that can come from open data. And I suppose the last thing I'd say is if you are publishing open data, never do it on a Friday, because if it goes wrong, then it ruins the weekend.
Awesome. Okay, so let me go ahead and get to Sarah's.
Sorry. Okay, so I've looked at it from open data from both the good and the bad. A lot of it was already covered today as far as some of the bad. But data has changed significantly over time. Whether it's open source intelligence, or whether it's a librarian, or whether it's somebody working in a scientific laboratory, what we've had access to has changed. And that is continuing to evolve. And as it evolves, sometimes people don't even think about the type of data that might be available, or the vehicle that data will be delivered in. And so that's some of the challenges I think that we as humanity actually face today, is how do we gauge, when something is too much or too little? I remember in 2002, when in the United Kingdom, there was a person who was not nice. His name was Abu Hamza al-Misri, and he had a website, and it belonged to something called the Finsbury Park Mosque at that time. And he was doing indoctrination, recruitment, and fundraising through his website for Al-Qaeda. And when I talked to somebody at that time, now keeping in mind this is 2002, the response was, okay, but that person has freedom of speech. That was the response. Okay, that person has freedom of speech. So that obviously has changed since that time, and that has evolved. But then the question becomes, when is it too much? When is the governance too much? And is that standard of governance being held equally, cross-culturally, cross-religiously, and between the East and the West and the North and the South? How is it being kept equal? Because I would argue right now there are extremisms online that are just as egregious, or I'm sorry, mispronounced that, or as dangerous as that was in 2002, that are operating today. So how do you govern that? You know, is it just the big tech that, you know, people are talking about as far as big tech? Or are the individuals accountable? You know, so that's something I think we're looking at today. So when you're looking at traditional collection sources, it goes through everything from the old school stuff to the new school stuff. And the graph on this slide, sorry, I do have some voice dysphonia. The graph on this slide is to show the haves and have-nots. And that's important too when you're talking about data governance, because not only is it talking about the haves and have-nots, like who has access to the data through the internet, that can also impact cognitive security. And the way that it could impact cognitive security is if you are in a place that is either what's called a filter bubble, where you're in an algorithm and you're not seeing outside information, or you're in a place where there's not a lot of access to the internet, or there's not a lot of access to the library, and you're being spoon-fed information. Both of those cause cognitive security issues. Next slide. So for data, AI, and open source intelligence, the good and the bad, there's a lot of things, and historically I used to look at bad, too much bad. But I've learned that there's a lot of things that this can be used for good. So, you know, it can go everything from helping somebody find a missing person to human rights investigations. I know there's an open source intelligence NGO called Bellingcat that does some great human rights investigations that they post online. Health OSINT, health open source information and health data, though, again, you have that balancing act. When is it too much? When is it too much to track a pandemic? And when is it necessary to go to the length that you're going to in collection? And then I'm not going to go through all of them on the slide, but I think that, you know, it's a fairly comprehensive list. And if you have a question about any of them, please ask me in Q&A. And as I mentioned on the bad, we have the haves and have-nots. This time in history is, and I've looked at adversarial use of information in multiple ways, but one that I would want to point out that's a new thing, or fairly new thing, is we now have, whether it's a state actor or non-state actor, we now have national level doxing, which is not open source intelligence. Okay, I know some people get a misunderstanding, they'll think doxing is OSINT, and it's not. So what has happened in Ukraine is you have state actors and non-state actors that have actually posted up online personal information of soldiers from either side. You know, socials, their ID number, their passport number, their photo, their family name, so on and so forth. It's no longer a question of one person picking on another person or one platform that's putting out stuff. It's now a question at a nation state level. I think GDPR is a good start. I think the United States, we need to relook at how we're protecting our information of our citizens so that we're not so easily doxed. But it is something that is a fairly new TTP or tactic, technique, or procedure. So, and if the other ones on here, please ask me during Q&A, because I heard we're almost out of time, and Silona still needs to speak. So the future evolutions and best practices of open data and open source intelligence are really dependent on humanity. And I know that sounds like a very cliche or bogus response, but it's true. And the reason that it's true is because you have to define, we as humans need to define what is acceptable and what is not. And you would think that it's easy, like we all sit here and we'd say, okay, I know genocide is wrong, okay? Genocide is a horrid thing. Yet if you sit a group of five representatives from different countries together, they're not gonna have the exact same definition. So we need to come together, and people need to come to open source wise, need to push and say, these are what we find is acceptable and not acceptable. Okay, that's it. I'm handing it to Silona.
Hi. So for me, I'll shorten mine up a little bit, and instead, I won't talk about any of my old stuff. I'll just talk about the new stuff. Right now, we at IEEE SA, the Standards Association, we're working on a new best practices called the OSSPG, Open Source Software Project Governance. And we're doing it as a best practice so that we can get all of the different aspects in it at once. We kind of try to build best practices from an academic point of view. One of the other really good examples of some of those standards that are already, somewhat completed and always in motion is the 7000 series, the ethicsanddesign.ieee.org, which actually just got cited by the European Commission on their new ethical AI paper that they're working on. And so we're trying to do something similar here for, first of all, the software project governance. But the next step is we've got a ton of things that are happening like this, I've noticed in a lot of other IEEE standards, where we're talking about that in the healthcare one, we're talking about it in the blockchain one, we're talking about it in the ethical design ones, all those different things. And so one of the reasons I wanted to do this was to kind of send up a little balloon flyer as to who would be interested in talking more about best practices in open data in a generalized fashion, not necessarily the specifics for every single one, but what are the things that we need to think about and that we need to look at. Obviously government has a bunch of different steps that they're like, hey, this is what we take to keep you safe. On the OSINT side, we've got a bunch of stuff of, oh, here's what we also do to keep you safe. I think that there's a lot more, as was brought up earlier about the colonialism, the more Aboriginal thinking about some of the other types of data as well for those disenfranchised people who might not even have internet access and things of that nature, and how are you going to be participatory when they don't even have access to the internet? And so bringing all of that together, and so not just corporate, I'm talking government, academia, non-profits, normally don't get to have enough of a voice in regards to this, and if anyone knows what's going down, it's them, and bringing everyone together. So that was my big push for my sneaky reason for doing this. And 5 minutes, it looks like, for questions. Yeah. Oh, wait, we need a mic. Oh, and I'm posting the slides, and there's a whole bunch of recommended readings and more stuff to go look at and things of that nature.
Hi, Xander Harrison. Lisa, you talked a little bit about DEFRA's previous efforts in publishing open data. These days, data.gov.uk is a bit of a desert, really. I was wondering if anyone had examples of organisations that are doing a really good job at releasing open data today or in the last couple of years.
I think it's about the federated approach now, isn't it? So I think at the moment, obviously, yeah, I agree, data.gov.uk needs a bit of work. The Elasticsearch doesn't work. You have to go to Google if you're going to find anything on there. And the amount of stuff on there is just hideous, isn't it? It's mixed. So I won't go down that rabbit hole. But I think if you think about trying to find the data and the almost what data publishers can do, because actually there's so much data out there at the moment, optimizing it for search engine optimization, being really, really clear about your data sets, and that plain English can really help. I think what we're starting to see is almost like flavours of portals popping up. So there'll be flavours in energy, there'll be flavours in water as people are trying to draw those data sets together. I think it's gonna be interesting because obviously data.gov.uk is just metadata, isn't it? We've got all these different platforms with the actual data on, but how that all works together, that architecture, I always explain it as a bit of the Russian doll problem. You always think you're the biggest Russian doll, don't you? And then there's others nested on top and top. And that's what we're dealing with, I think, when we're looking at this. So I don't think there's an easy solution, but I think there's got to be definitely a lot more more design in thinking about how do we join all this stuff together without creating tons and tons of platforms that's going to cause even more problems.
Yeah, and I see that happening a lot in regards to the metadata standards that different people are working on. But the problem is way too often they end up being too situated in the technology itself and not carrying it out to the people and the other different aspects of it too. And so we have to be careful, and we have to keep an eye on that in regards to the standards that we do to make sure that we are actually bringing back the ethical and moral aspects of it. Mike. Sorry, this is my teacher's pet back here, so have to take his question.
Sorry. So, I mean, great talk and very interesting perspectives from the three of you. So I work for a university, and so many of the faculty I work with do lots of data work, right? And I know a lot of the subjects spoken up on stage were more about like the securitization of data and, you know, like dangers with doing so. But most of the faculty I talk to are actually like, their biggest struggle is they're like, I don't know how to share data correctly, right? I don't know how to share data in a way that it's findable or that like it's in the right format. I don't even know how to know this. I was just wondering, between the three of you who are kind of sort of experts in this area, like who would you recommend that we watch to like figure out what are the best practices in this area? Are there any organizations or initiatives that come to mind for doing so?
I'd say talk to the ODI.
I was about to say, I think she's got a bias on that one right there, yes. But at the same time, I've been looking over their stuff, and it's really good, because that's why I wanted to have her on the panel. So obviously, I've got my own bias as well. I'm watching a lot of different stuff go through, and some of the stuff that I think is really interesting is going to be some of the stuff that is coming out of the ethics of AI portion, because so much of it at this point is going to be both the citation aspects of it as well as the accountability portions. And once you get some of that in there, you know, how do you unwind that? Because once you get a certain amount of aggregate information, privacy still goes away. You know, we have this whole idea of, you know, privacy through obscurity. And that's not happening, and we have to get past that, and we have to figure out what that's actually going to look like, which is like why she was saying so much of the data ends up being metadata.
I come from a different approach. I look at it more of the tradecraft and methodology of the sharing versus one source. So I think, you know, one thing that is really good is to look at knowledge management systems. And information dissemination through knowledge management systems, that's I think a good way to also go.
Yeah, and I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that we are actually doing open knowledge-based data standards. So, yeah. But that's why I said, why a general best practice? Because I feel like there's so many pieces like what you've brought up that we all need to get in there and start discussing, and having something that's more overall, and then we can dive down into our nitty-gritty musts versus shoulds. Thanks. That time? Yeah.
I think it is. Just stay where you are for a second, if you wouldn't mind. I'd just like everyone to show their appreciation for Silona, for Sarah, and for Lisa. Thank you.